It was barely 5 in the morning, and the house still smelled like sleep and last night's rain. I moved through the kitchen on autopilot, heels on hardwood, coffee brewing, suitcase waiting by the door. Lucas was right there, just like always. He handed me my favorite mug without asking, zipped up my suitcase, and smiled like this was just another Tuesday. And maybe it was. We had a routine, and honestly, it worked. There was comfort in the familiarity, in how he always knew what I needed before I said a word. I kissed him goodbye, quick, warm, like we always did. He tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, the way he used to when we first met. I smiled, not because the moment was grand, but because it was ours. Reliable. Normal. And in this messy world, I counted that as a blessing. I grabbed my bag, whispered something about texting when I landed, and headed out the door. The city was still half asleep, and for a second, so was I. But as I climbed into the cab and watched the lights blur past the window, I remember thinking, I'm lucky. Lucky to have a man I can count on. Lucky to know what I'm coming home to. It wasn't fireworks, but it was trust. Or at least, that's what I thought. That morning, I had no idea what was already in motion back home. The cab smelled faintly of leather and pine air freshener, one of those little green trees swinging from the mirror. I watched the driver in the rear view as he nodded along to some AM radio show, not saying much, which I appreciated. My mind was already halfway through the pitch I'd be giving in a few hours, projected numbers, market shifts, polished smiles. But under all that, there was this low hum of contentment. I had a good job, a solid marriage, a life that made sense. And these early flights? Just part of the package. I scrolled through my phone, answering a few emails, deleting some junk, and sending Lucas a heart emoji. Something small, but ours. He always said I worked too hard, but he never made me feel guilty for it. That meant more to me than he probably knew. We'd been through rough patches, sure. Who hasn't? But we always circled back to each other, like gravity. He made me feel anchored, safe. Like no matter how chaotic the world got, there was one person who'd never surprise me. That morning, I wasn't second-guessing anything. Not the flight, not the marriage, not the way his eyes met mine when I left. If anything, I felt a little guilty for how easily I slid into work mode while he stayed behind. But Lucas was the kind of man who held down the fort. He didn't need grand declarations. He just showed up. Always. That's what I kept telling myself as the airport signs came into view and the sun began to rise behind the skyline. Inside the terminal, everything moved in fast forward. Luggage wheels clattering, boarding calls echoing, the smell of burnt espresso from the nearby cafe. I checked in, breezed through security, and found a quiet corner near my gate. I exhaled. My shoulders finally dropped. These were the moments I liked. The in-betweens. The pause before the performance. I pulled out my phone again, not to check work this time, but just to look at a photo of Lucas and me from our last anniversary. Smiling. Holding hands. Steady. Sometimes I wondered if we'd gotten too used to the rhythm of things. Too comfortable. But then again, isn't that what people crave? A life that doesn't feel like a constant question mark? We didn't have wild passion, not anymore. But we had reliability, history, the kind of love that ages into something quieter, more grounded. I never once believed he'd risk any of that. Not Lucas. Not the man who always remembered to refill my vitamins and warm up the car when it was cold. I took one last sip of my coffee and smiled to myself. You're lucky, I thought. Not everyone gets this kind of love. As the boarding announcement rang out overhead, I reached for my bag, ready to chase another goal, another meeting, another checkmark on the life we were building. I had no idea what was about to flash across my screen, or how quickly everything would shift from ordinary to unforgettable. I was half listening to the final boarding call when my phone buzzed. Nothing unusual, just a push notification from the security app we'd installed months ago after a neighbor had a break-in. Motion detected. Living room camera. I almost ignored it. Those alerts were usually just shadows or the cat from next door triggering something through the window. But something made me tap. Maybe boredom, maybe habit. Maybe intuition, quietly knocking. I opened the app, expecting nothing. The screen took a second to load. A swirl of static, then clarity. And what I saw didn't make sense, at first. There she was, in my living room, laughing like she'd been there 100 times before. Natalie, his ex. The one who used to show up in awkward stories and forced reassurances. The one who, according to him, was ancient history. My stomach didn't drop. It twisted, clenched, and sat like a stone. I didn't blink. Couldn't. Lucas walked in frame a second later. No hesitation, no confusion, just familiarity. The way he hugged her. Too long, too close, too easy. Like it wasn't the first time. Like he didn't have a wife en route to another city, trusting him completely. I kept watching, even when I wanted to look away. Every second chipped at something I thought was solid. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't innocent. This was betrayal, raw and real, and I was watching it live. I froze in that plastic airport chair, surrounded by strangers sipping lattes and flipping through boarding passes, while my entire world cracked open in my hands. I didn't cry. I didn't make a sound. But inside, something snapped, quietly, like glass under pressure. I kept watching the footage, needing to see more, even as my heart screamed for me to shut it off. Natalie sat on our couch. My couch. She looked so at ease, like she belonged, like she never left. Lucas poured her coffee from the French press he and I used every Sunday. That detail hit me like a punch. The smallest things always do. She smiled at him, touched his arm like it was muscle memory, and he didn't pull away. He leaned in, said something I couldn't hear, and she laughed again. God, that laugh. It sounded like mockery now. I was watching them play house in the ruins of mine. They had no idea I was seeing every second of it. No idea the lie had already shattered. And yet, even then, I didn't panic. I didn't text him. I didn't call. What was there to say? That I saw him for who he really was? That the man I kissed goodbye had barely waited for the door to close behind me? No, this wasn't a moment for begging or breakdowns. This was the moment I decided something else. Something colder, sharper. I closed the app, sat up straighter, and for the first time in a long time, I stopped being the woman who trusted. The gate agent called my row, and people started lining up with backpacks and sleepy smiles. I just sat there, perfectly still. I looked like any other traveler about to board a plane, but inside, I was rerouting. Every instinct in me was suddenly alert, sharp, focused. I watched them one last time, those two ghosts dancing in my living room. Then I hit record. I saved the footage and emailed it to myself, twice. Once to my inbox, once to a folder Lucas didn't even know existed. I stood up slowly, walked past the boarding lane, and headed straight to the customer service desk. My voice was steady, even kind, when I said, "I won't be taking this flight anymore." The agent blinked at me, surprised. "Is there a reason?" I smiled softly. "Just a change of plans." She had no idea. No one did. But in my gut, I knew. I wasn't flying away from anything. I was flying straight into the truth, and this time, I wouldn't miss. As I walked back through the terminal, my heels echoed with purpose. I wasn't devastated. Not yet. That would come later, maybe. But in that moment, I was wide awake. And one thing became painfully, beautifully clear. I wasn't going to confront him. Not just yet. I was going to destroy the illusion, piece by piece, and make sure they both saw exactly who they'd underestimated. The cab ride home was quiet, too quiet for the storm I felt brewing inside. I stared out the window as the city rushed by, glass and concrete blurring into streaks of light. My mind wasn't racing, it was calculating. I wasn't crying or shaking or screaming into the void like the movies tell you should. No, I was still, focused, and weirdly calm. Sometimes when the truth finally burns through, the heat doesn't scorch, it clarifies. I wasn't going to fall apart. I was going to act. First, I pulled up the footage again, not because I needed to see it, but because I needed to own it. I hit download, then uploaded it to a hidden cloud folder I'd used once during a messy merger at work. Old habits die hard. I backed it up twice more, email, flash drive. Whatever happened next, that proof would never disappear. This wasn't paranoia, it was insurance, evidence, and honestly, a small taste of control in a moment where everything else had been ripped from under me. Then I opened my messages and typed 3 words to my assistant. Cancel my meetings. I added, family emergency, and hit send. Technically true, if you consider the crumbling of everything you trusted a family matter. I stared at my reflection in the cab's glass. Same face, same blazer. But something had shifted. Something permanent. I wasn't going home to ask for an explanation. I was going to deliver one. I started rehearsing what I'd say. Not a speech, but a moment. A moment he'd never forget. No screaming, no chaos. That would be too easy. I wanted silence, precision. I wanted him to feel the weight of my stillness, to hear his own guilt echo in the quiet I'd leave behind. This wasn't just about Natalie. It was about every time he looked me in the eye and lied. Every morning kiss wrapped in routine, every "I love you" that now rang hollow in my ears. The cab slowed as we turned onto our street. Trees swayed gently in the wind. Birds still sang like the world hadn't just cracked in two. Everything looked the same. Our house sat there peacefully, like it wasn't hiding something rotten inside. I rolled down the window just a little. I wanted to feel the air, cold, honest. At least the wind never lied. I paid the driver, stepped out, and stood at the curb for a second longer than necessary, centering myself. I reached for the handle of my suitcase, the same one Lucas had packed just a couple of hours ago, completely unaware. That detail wasn't lost on me. There was something poetic about dragging the bag he so carefully zipped shut right back into the mess he created. I walked up the steps slowly, key already in hand, pulse steady. No hesitation, no fear. Just me, my truth, and the sharp edge of clarity ready to slice the air the moment I opened that door. The moment I stepped inside, the house greeted me like nothing had happened. Same scent of citrus cleaner, same framed photos on the entry table, Lucas and me in Paris, grinning like the future was ours. I didn't stop to stare. I knew better now. I walked through each room like I was flipping a switch in my brain. Kitchen, deception, hallway, denial, living room, truth. It was all right there. And soon, he would see it too. Not just see it, feel it. I placed my suitcase down quietly, not because I was hiding, but because I wanted the weight of that silence to grow. I could hear faint laughter coming from the living room. Hers. Still. That was almost amusing, in a twisted way. She was comfortable enough to laugh, to make herself at home in my space. I took out my phone. Not to call. Not yet. Just to make sure the video file was ready, right there at my fingertips. One play button away. I stood at the edge of the room, where hardwood met carpet, just out of sight. One deep breath. My heart wasn't pounding. It was steady, like a drumbeat before battle. I didn't storm in. I walked, calm, controlled. The kind of calm that comes after everything inside you has already been set on fire. They didn't hear me at first, but they would. They were about to witness the final flight I ever missed, and what happened when I landed on my terms. He looked up first. I saw the flicker in his eyes. Recognition, then confusion, then fear. Natalie turned, still smiling, until she saw me. Her expression dropped so fast it was almost satisfying. I stood there, suitcase by my side, one hand in my coat pocket, the other holding my phone. No yelling, no theatrics, just presence. My presence. And it filled the room like a flood. Lucas opened his mouth to speak, but I beat him to it. "Don't," I said. Just that. One word. Enough to make him shut his mouth like a slammed door. Natalie stepped back slightly, unsure now. Good. I walked in slowly, letting the silence wrap around them like a noose. I looked at Lucas like I was looking at a stranger. Not someone I once trusted. Not someone who used to trace circles on my back at night. Just a man who'd mistaken my love for stupidity. And that mistake? It was about to cost him. He tried again, voice softer now, reaching for me like that would make it better. "It's not what it looks like," he said. I met his eyes, steady, and then I said, almost kindly, "Then let me show you what it does look like." I opened the video, pressed play, and let them both watch, every second of it. No fast forward, no pause. Just truth, raw and unedited, right there on the same couch they'd defiled. And for once, they had nothing to say. They stood frozen, like kids caught with their hands in something they swore they didn't touch. Natalie looked everywhere but at me. Lucas, though, he kept trying to hold my gaze, as if there was still a version of us he could salvage with the right words. There wasn't. The video ended, and the silence that followed was louder than any scream. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I just placed the phone down on the table, neatly, like a receipt, like proof of purchase. And what I'd bought with it? My freedom. I reached for my left hand slowly and slid off the wedding ring he'd given me 5 years ago on a windy beach in Charleston. I remembered how he cried that day, how I believed every word. I held the ring in my palm for a moment, not mourning it, just studying it. Then I placed it next to the phone, on the glass coffee table where they had once toasted champagne the night we moved in. No drama, just finality. And then I turned to her. "He always said you were a mistake," I told her, voice steady. "Turns out he was right. You both are." Her mouth opened slightly, like she wanted to defend herself, but I gave her nothing. Not my anger, not my sadness, not even my attention. She didn't deserve it. Lucas started to say my name, softer this time, as if he could appeal to the part of me that used to love him. But that part wasn't here anymore. She left the moment I pressed play. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to explain. My silence did more damage than 1,000 accusations ever could. They stood there, awkward, exposed, unsure of what came next. But I knew. I'd already rehearsed it in my mind a dozen times on the way here. I walked past them, calm as ever, and headed toward the stairs. Not in retreat, but in reclaiming. This was still my home for now, and I would leave on my terms, not theirs. I heard him say my name again, softer now, desperate. But I didn't respond. He wanted a conversation, a crack in the wall. I gave him nothing. I gathered a few things upstairs, some clothes, documents, the small silver box where I kept the letters he used to write me before we got married. I didn't even read them. I just tossed them into the trash bin and kept packing. I felt strangely light, like I was peeling off a version of myself I didn't need anymore. When I came back down, they were still in the living room, frozen, like statues in a scene they no longer controlled. I wheeled my suitcase past them, opened the door, and paused just once to look back, not at him, but at myself. The version of me who believed love meant loyalty, the version who thought she was safe. I didn't say goodbye. That would have made it personal. In this moment, it wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. The air outside felt different, sharper, cleaner, like something had been lifted off my chest the moment that door closed behind me. I didn't cry. I didn't even breathe heavily. I just walked, each step pulling me further away from the lie I'd lived in and closer to the truth I was choosing. I wasn't walking away from a husband. I was walking toward myself. That's what they never expect, the quiet ones to leave loud. But sometimes the loudest thing you can do is simply go. I called a car from the corner of our street. While I waited, I opened my phone, not to scroll through messages or revisit the footage, but to draft an email. Subject line: Dissolution of marriage. Legal inquiry. Cold? Maybe. But clarity has its own kind of warmth. I CC'd a lawyer recommended by a friend months ago, back when she went through her own quiet storm. I never thought I'd need it. But here I was, stronger for knowing when to pull the ripcord. The car arrived. The driver gave me a polite nod, and I slid into the back seat like a woman on a mission. Because I was. I booked a hotel for the night, not far from my office, somewhere with good lighting and clean sheets. I texted my assistant again. Send flowers to the client. Tell them I'll reschedule. Something came up. She replied instantly, handled. I smiled. Not because everything was okay, but because I was. Back in the hotel room, I slipped off my blazer and let my body finally feel the weight of the day. Not the kind of weight that crushes, but the kind that tells you you've just carried something important across a finish line. I didn't pace. I didn't crumble. I poured myself a glass of water, opened my laptop, and began writing. Not a post, not a revenge story, just my truth. A journal entry maybe, or something I'd share one day with someone who needed it. I didn't need a spotlight. I didn't want pity. But I did want to reclaim the narrative. Because for too long I'd told myself that stable was the same as happy, that predictable meant safe. And now I knew better. I was done apologizing for being ambitious, for wanting more, for trusting someone who didn't deserve it. I was done performing gratitude for a life that looked good on the outside, but felt hollow inside. I was done settling. I hit save on the document, titled it "The Day I Walked Out," and closed the lid. Simple as that. No tears. Just truth. And then because I could, I ordered room service. Pasta and red wine. I turned on something light, some old romantic comedy I used to love, and curled up on the crisp white sheets. This wasn't a sad ending. It was a soft landing. And that, I realized, is its own kind of victory. The next morning, I woke up early, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The sun filtered through the curtains like an invitation, not a deadline. I packed my things neatly, checked out of the hotel, and called a cab, not to go back, but forward. I didn't know exactly where I was headed next, and that was the beauty of it. For the first time in a long time, the unknown didn't scare me. It felt like freedom. At the airport, I moved through security like a woman untethered. No alerts on my phone, no husband waiting at home. Just me. A fresh boarding pass and a destination that was mine alone. I found my seat by the window, settled in, and watched the ground begin to shrink beneath us. I reached for my phone, stared at the screen for a long moment, then smiled. And with one small decision, I powered it off. He broke the vow, she broke the illusion. But I broke the cycle, and as the cloud stretched out like a blank page before me, I didn't feel regret. I didn't feel rage. I felt ready to begin again. Not as someone's wife or someone's fool, but as someone who finally chose herself,